Hi, my name is Patti Barnard, and I'm married to Roland Barnard, and we lead the JoshGen Black and Fell congregation. I want to speak about abortion and abortion counseling from my own life experience. When I was 17 years old, I fell pregnant. I was in my matric year, and I was very nervous to speak to my parents about the fact that I was pregnant. I approached my sister, my older sister, and she went and told my parents. My father was a very proud man, and I knew that this news would really upset him, which it did. My parents made the decision that I would go over to London. They booked me into a clinic in London, a medical clinic for an abortion. It was in 1979, and abortion in South Africa was illegal, and they really did want to protect me from a health point of view. My mom tried to convince me that this was the best thing for me. I had my whole future ahead of me. I needed to finish my matric. It was halfway through my matric. I needed to finish my matric. I needed to study the next year, and a baby just would not fit into that. I knew for my father it was a problem of shame, and that he just wanted the problem to go away. So I went through with the abortion. We, as a family, my mom and my dad and myself, we went over to London, where I went through with the abortion. When I got back to South Africa, I just picked up my life. I put it out of my memory, and I remember the day that my father fetched me from the abortion clinic, and he said to me, "We will never speak about this again." And so I made a decision that I would never talk about it. And I got back to South Africa, and I just continued with my life. I picked up my relationship again with Roland, even though my father had tried to forbid us to continue our relationship. I picked it up again, and I carried on with life. I tried to just put it out of my memory. I didn't speak about it to anybody. I didn't go for counseling. I just continued with my life. I continued in that way. Roland and I continued in our relationship. We got engaged at a very young age. I was 19 and he was 20, but my father had kind of given up on me because I had let him down. When I went to him and said I want to get married, he was like, "Oh, do what you want to do." He wasn't very supportive at all. I knew that I had ashamed him so much with what had happened. So we got engaged, and then Roland was about to go to do his national service in 1982, and I had been struggling with this hollowness, this emptiness inside of me, this pain that I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was, and I wasn't able to speak to anybody about it, so I just put my head down and continued with life. And then in February 1982, I went to a meeting with my older sister and her husband, and I gave my heart to Jesus. And it was from that time that that pain inside of me became more difficult. I then realized what I had done, that I knew, because this is what we were being taught, is that God knew me before I was formed in my mother's womb, and that God knew my baby before it was formed in my womb. And that became such a reality to me that I really struggled with shame, the shame and the guilt that came upon me. You know, before that time, the enemy didn't really care because I wasn't serving Jesus. But once I got into the place of serving Jesus, it was like he bombarded me with guilt and shame. And I walked with guilt and shame for many, many years. And I had my first son, Seth, and I remember when I fell pregnant with Seth, I constantly had this thing inside of me that what happens if something goes wrong because of the abortion? And or what if I lose him? What if I have a miscarriage? But I had a pregnancy that went without any problems. I had Seth, and then I had Daniel in 1989. I had Daniel, and I was still carrying this pain inside of me. I went on to have a third baby with no complications, but I still had this deep pain inside of me, and I would always think about, I wonder what sex the baby was. It would come up, but I couldn't talk about it. I couldn't even talk about it to Roland. Even though he was the father, it was something I'd made a declaration, I'd made a vow that I would never speak about it. And then so we went from there, we planted a church in Nelspruit, and I remember our first eldership couple that came on with us. I did go to them and we did tell them what had happened, but I cried and it was still so painful. And I realized that I actually hadn't had healing. And then we went to Benoni, we took over the church in Benoni, and I still was carrying this pain inside of me. And then there was a lady who joined our congregation, and she was a counselor. And she was doing a lot of counseling at the time. And I went to her counseling/ministry, when I say that, because it was also not just counseling, but it was prayer ministry. And I approached her and I told her what had happened, and I said to her, I really needed help. I wasn't overcoming this pain inside of me that I was carrying around. And she did ministry with me. And so from what ministry I've received and through what I experienced, I would like to just give a few pointers of how we can help somebody when they've had an abortion. So for me, the first thing that we dealt with was unforgiveness. And I had to come to terms with the fact that I had unforgiveness, especially towards my father. I also had unforgiveness towards my mother because I felt like she hadn't fought on my behalf, that she hadn't stood with me. I felt that she had let me down. So I needed to go through the process of forgiving my mother and forgiving my father. I didn't need to forgive the father of the baby, but in some instances that is necessary. That depending on the circumstances, sometimes what happens is that the father of the baby abandons the young girl or the lady who has had an abortion. Maybe they don't agree with it, whatever it is. There could be unforgiveness towards the father of the baby. I didn't have that, but it can happen. I also had to forgive myself, and I think that was the hardest, was forgiving myself, that I had allowed this to happen to me. And I would often think about, I could have fought my parents, I could have refused to go, but because I had caused such shame to the family, I felt like I had no choice. So I needed to forgive myself as well. And so that was the first step, was to have forgiveness towards those three people. The second step for me was the fact that I believed that I had committed the unforgivable sin. In my head, I knew that wasn't true, but in my heart, I felt that I had committed the unforgivable sin. And when people used to speak about, to me, as we were leading a church at that stage, when people would talk about, I've committed this terrible sin, I would always inside of me say, but you've never committed murder. And for me, that was such a lie that the enemy had planted in me, that I believed it as truth. Even though I knew what the word said, I still couldn't get over the feeling that this was an unforgivable sin. And even though I knew by grace and I knew all what the word said, still it wasn't a reality for me. And this lady went through the process of, we prayed together and we trusted the Lord to take that root lie and to change it for the truth. And even though I knew the word, the Lord brought revelation of the word to me that day. And I was set free from that lie. And for the first time, I truly felt like this sin had been forgiven. And it was amazing because no matter how many words were spoken to me, how many times Roland had told me that that wasn't the truth, when God came and he brought that revelation and he changed that lie to truth, I had breakthrough. The third thing that was needed to be dealt with was that I had made a vow. I had made a vow that I would never bring this sin into the light. And I had on occasion maybe told somebody, but still, if the word abortion was used, or I watched a TV program, or I saw something on media about abortion, my feelings would well up inside of me, and that guilt and shame would become so relevant, so real in my life. And I had breakthrough in many other areas of my life, but this was one area that I was really struggling in. So in this counseling, we broke that vow. I had to make a statement saying, I break that vow that I made was not a vow that God wanted me to make. That he speaks so clearly about things that are in the dark, the enemy will use against us. But when we bring things into the light, there is healing. And for me, that needed to become a revelation. And that did happen. I broke that vow over my life. Then the other thing is that I needed emotional healing from the pain, that sense of loss. I was walking around with loss. I had lost something, and I needed the Lord to come and heal me in my emotions. Almost like grief counseling. I needed him to come and heal my emotions. And that is what he did. I still felt pain when I would think about it. And I would think about, if only I hadn't done that. And I would think around the time where I would have had a baby. When that time would come, I would think, what if I hadn't gone through with it? But I needed to trust the Lord to come and to heal that pain. No words, no counseling, nothing could take away that pain. But the Lord did come, and he started the healing process in my emotions. The other area that I needed to be set free in is from a physical. I needed physical healing, because I really felt that because of the abortion, and statistically I had done a lot of research, there is a 50% chance of women who have had invasive abortions, which is what I had, what they term invasive abortion, that they have a 50% chance of having breast cancer or cervical cancer or womb cancer because of the trauma that is caused. And I needed the Lord to heal me, because in the back of my mind I always thought, if I get cancer, it's my own fault and I deserve it because of what I've done. And I needed the Lord to come and to reassure me that that wasn't the truth. That wasn't what he wanted for me. And even in that, I've had a testimony. I come from a family that I have two sisters and my mother all had hysterectomies at around 35. They all have the same problem, and I made a decision that I wanted to go through menopause naturally. So my two sisters and my mom didn't go through natural menopause. They had hysterectomies at an early age, and they really struggled through menopause. They really struggled with their woman's reproduction, and it was something that ran in our family. And I said to the Lord, I want to have a testimony in this. Even with what has happened to me, I want to have a testimony in this. And it is amazing. And I'm 58. I haven't had hysterectomy. I still am very natural. I'm only just starting menopause now. In the last 6 months, I've started menopause, natural menopause. And I really, when my friends ask me, you're only going through menopause now, I'm saying, like, but you don't understand. For me, this is a testimony because I believe that God did physically heal me. And I just see that as such a huge testimony. And I know that may sound strange to many, like, okay. But for me, that is so part of my testimony. The other area, when we are dealing with ladies who have had an abortion, many ladies suffer from severe depression or even suicidal thoughts. And fortunately for me, and I think it's just part of who I am not a depressive person. So I didn't go into depression. I had emotional healing I needed, but I didn't get that deep depression or suicidal thoughts. But I know I've counseled many who have because of the guilt and the shame. And some have even tried to take their own lives. They cannot live with that shame and guilt. And when that happens, you open a door to a spirit of death. And so often in abortion counseling, that needs to be dealt with, where ladies have opened the door. And because abortion is murder, it opens the door to depression and to suicidal thoughts. So that needs to be dealt with in ministry as well, is that spirit of death that can be part of what somebody is struggling with. The shame and the guilt that goes with abortion, I cannot explain to you how it is almost overwhelming. And that is the thing that really needs to be dealt with, is that shame and that guilt, no words can change that. Only God, by the Holy Spirit, can change that, by bringing truth and bringing revelation that you are forgiven and that there is no shame and there is no guilt. When God forgives you, there is no shame and no guilt. But it does not happen overnight. And for me, this process didn't happen overnight. I went for a while, I went for counseling. But at the end of the day, after that, I still wasn't in a hurry to just go and tell people. I still had this reservation of what will people think of me. And that is a big thing in abortion, is that what will people think of me? How will they feel about me after I tell them? And in 2012, I really felt that I wanted to help ladies who had had an abortion. I had felt that from the moment that I got saved, that God was going to use this for His glory. And I always knew that I'd be involved in some way in abortion counseling. So in 2012, I felt in the Lord to open up a pregnancy crisis center. I called it Life Choices, and it's still going in Benoni. And I went on many courses on pre-abortion counseling, and I was later going to move into post-abortion counseling. But we needed to do the pre-abortion counseling first. So I opened up Life Choices, and that for me just opened up a whole new way for me, because I realized that people would say to me, but why are you so passionate about pre-abortion counseling? And I could tell my story. And for the first time, I had such freedom in telling my story. But just prior to that, I needed to tell 3 very important people in my life what had happened. And I needed to tell my son. So I think it was just before that, probably end of 2011, I told my sons about the fact that I'd had an abortion. They were very gracious, and they were grown men they already were married. Two of them were already married. Seth and Daniel were married. And Joel was still at home. And I sat down one day, I can remember the day. Individually, I sat down and I told them about the fact that I had an abortion. And I must just say my boys were so gracious towards me. And that helped with the healing. But you know, when I told them, that was when I truly had breakthrough. I then went on to open Life Choices Pregnancy Crisis Center. And on the opening of that Life Choices, we invited a whole lot of people from now City on a Hill Church. We invited a whole lot of people, and they came, and I told them my story. And from there on, just bringing it into the light, I've since told my story on many occasions. I've told my story in City Bowl congregation. I've told my story in Durbanville congregation. I've told my story in Brackenfell. Even before I knew we were coming to lead Brackenfell, I had told my story. And that is what has brought such freedom. This has come from darkness into the light. And I know that God is going to use this for His glory. And so I hope that is helpful. If you are helping somebody that has had an abortion, to just remember those few things. And I'm sure there are other things as well. But those are the things that stood out for me. So I really just want to say there are so many young ladies who have had abortions and who need help. And that we need to keep our ears open for them. And we can really help them get through this with the help of Jesus. That they cannot do it in their own strength, but they can do it with the help of Jesus.